maybe also remove your video.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Jay, I think you can start.
Okay, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Mental Health Matters session. Thank you very much for joining us. I can see there's quite a few participants already started tuning in, and that's brilliant. We'll just do use the Q&A tab on your screen to ask any questions or to say hello. Myself, I'll be presenting today, and I've also got Reynald on the as a supporter, as a moderator, who will be looking at the content on the Q&A and also making sure that we answer any questions that you ask. So do use that Q&A tab. So today's session is on mental health and why it matters, and also about how we can look after our own mental health during this time of adversity and difficulty during the current coronavirus pandemic. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at what is mental health, because before we start talking about this, it's important that we have a bit of a shared understanding around this topic. And also we're going to think about how can I cope with the COVID-19 pandemic? How can I cope during this time of unrest, uncertainty and adversity? And I'm going to introduce what I find are some helpful tools and sort of open it up to say if anybody else has got any suggestions, then please do share them. But we're going to look at some helpful tools and strategies that might be useful for us or people we know, friends or family or fellow scouts. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time at the end bringing everything back together again as a summary, and also give people the opportunity to ask any questions that they have. Can you also just confirm that my sound is working and you can hear me clearly and I'm not just talking to myself? I can see some nice messages there, people from the Philippines, from Australia, from Jordan. Perfect, thank you for confirming that. And that's Scoutadelic there, the famous Scoutadelic. So, before we start, one of the things I just want to address is that mental health can be a very difficult topic to talk about. We all have a relationship with these themes and with these topics, and that relationship is sometimes a very personal one. Perhaps we have lived experience of poor mental health, or perhaps right now we're currently struggling with our mental health. I want to say that your safety and well-being is really important. We're not going to be talking about specific difficulties such as depression, suicide, or anxiety in this session, mainly because of the length of the session and just the nature of it being with such an international, diverse audience. But I just want to say that these topics are really important, and we've highlighted some of the references that we think are helpful for you to look at afterwards, as we think this might be a useful resource for you. Whilst we're talking about this subject, I also want us to remember our Scout values, and although I'm sure we'll all be absolutely collaborative and helpful to each other today, just to remind ourselves that it's okay to disagree and have different opinions on these topics, and that's perfectly natural and helpful actually. But just to remember our Scout values and the way we communicate about these topics. We have a diverse range of people with us today from all over the world, all regions, different walks of life. So the difference in opinion is going to be vast, and that's what makes Scouting such a wonderful thing. So before we start talking about mental health, I want us to start off with the fact that we need to understand what health is on a wide scale before we look at mental health. And health, interestingly, is defined by the World Health Organization It's not the exact quote, but it's about the three areas of physical health, so our biological and physiological health, our social health, so the health we have in our environment, our communities, the people we know, our family, our friends, and so our social well-being, and also our mental health and mental well-being. But without health, without mental health, there is no health. We could be a top athlete and be extremely socially connected and busy and a productive person, but actually without a degree of mental well-being, without us being able to look after our mental health, we can't have health. So there's no health without mental health. And a definition that I think is quite helpful for such a global audience comes from the World Health Organization. And it's that mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. Now, a quick question for you there is to just say, do any of those words or phrases sound a little bit like scouting? If you were to put that on a WASM branded information leaflet about the scouting program, would that make sense? Would words like working productively, make a contribution to her or his community, realizing his or her own potential, coping, all these words and phrases are words that we already use in scouting to describe what we do. And that's because we already do an awful lot to support young people and adults' mental health around the world. I'll just pause a second to see if there's any comments on that at all. Please do feel free to ask any questions or make an observation. So to think more about mental health specifically, it's about how we think. So that's our cognitions, our processes, how we feel. So we often think about feelings being about the heart. And although it's not necessarily in the heart where we have our feelings, it's a good way of kind of imagining it. We've got our thinking and our feelings. The reality is they all are kind of generated in our head, also throughout our body. But it's about how we think, how we feel, how we see ourselves, and how we see the world around us, ourselves, but also how we see the world and interpret what's going on around us. And it's something we experience every single day. It's really interesting to think about. Well, I find it interesting to think about it as being something that influences us every single day. And it's something that we all experience all the time. We all go through the day-to-day up and downs with our mental health, with our emotions, with our thoughts. And that's completely to be expected and totally normal part of human behavior. So then, just like physical health, we all then have mental health. So every single one of us on this call today, every single one of us on this planet, every single scout around the world has some level of mental health. And sometimes that can mean somebody's really well and healthy and really fit and able in their mental health. And sometimes that means that some people are really quite poorly and really quite unwell. And everyone is somewhere on that spectrum. And we'll all move to somewhere along that spectrum throughout our life. It's constantly shifting and constantly changing. I also want to make a point on scouting and mental health and about how, and ask the question to yourselves, do you think being a scout is good for your mental health, good for your well-being? please answer that on the Q&A tab. I'll put these points up as well so we can read them. Let me have a little look at this Q&A tab. Right now, I can see there's new comments, but I'm not sure if I'm actually capturing what people are saying. Yes, I think scouting is good for mental health. Thank you, Clara. Definitely, yes. Okay, they're all coming through now. I could see those new ones coming in, but I wasn't able to read them. Yes, and I also have to think about what do you think it is about scouting that's good for people's mental health? Maybe that's a good thing to consider. What we know is there's been some research completed, and we know that scouts are 15% less likely to develop a mood disorder over their life. And a mood disorder here means things like anxiety disorders or depression, very, very common mental health difficulties that most of us will experience some level of at some point in our life, or at least know people that will. And it's about being less likely to develop those kinds of difficulties. We also know that scouts are more resilient than non-scouts and scored 9% in this particular research on belongingness. We also know that mental health is included in the Sustainable Development Goals, for which World Scouting, us as a community, are working towards to improve and to work on. Why scouting is good for mental health? Well, actually, a couple of the biggest difficulties that people have, one of them is loneliness. And loneliness is not about proximity to others, it's a connection with others and having a shared meaning with others. And perhaps scouting is an antidote to some of those difficulties around loneliness, where we can have a shared meaning together with other humans. There's many, many reasons, and be interested to see if you've got any observations for why you think scouting is good for mental health. So I want to bring us on to thinking about how I cope during COVID-19 or the current coronavirus pandemic. I think the first thing to consider here is that these difficulties we're currently going through will affect us all physically, socially, and emotionally or mentally. And that's going to be a global experience. And to some people, it will be a huge, profound impact. In some of those areas, for some of us, maybe at some point, maybe it already has. So it's okay not to be okay, no matter your situation. So even if people are worse off than you, which the world is like that, there's always going to be people that are worse off than you, it doesn't make your difficulties less important. It's okay not to be okay, even when actually things objectively may seem okay. Whatever you're going through right now, it's important that you recognize those difficulties and give yourself time to adjust and respond and recover from. Sometimes we can dismiss our own feelings because of other people's situation. And yes, their situation may be difficult and really horrible, but doesn't mean your situation isn't either. So the less we compare ourselves in that way to others, the more helpful it can be. And also, as scouts, we can help others. It is ingrained within us as scouts to help other people. Of course it is. But equally, we need to recognize that in order to do that, we need to look after ourselves. You might think about it in terms of physical first aid, where the first letter of physical first aid for many, if an international kind of protocol for it, is the D. So for doctors A, B, C, the D stands for danger. And that's about looking after ourselves and recognizing what our safety needs are as well. And that's the same for mental health first aid when we look at the A, which is a different model of first aid, but it's about approaching people in a safe way and making sure we keep safe too. So we need to look after ourselves before we can help other people. So some top tips for what we can do right now and do in our life, and maybe these are things that we can share with other people. I'd like to hear if anybody else has some top tips as well. Please feel free to comment on the Q&A tab. So a couple of things to think about. First of all, focus on what I can do right now. What is your role? What do you have the resources and the ability to do right now? Sometimes with such a global problem, with such a global disaster around the world, we get overwhelmed by the amount of things that are happening, the amount of people that are having difficulties. And what we need to do is zoom in on what we can do right in this minute, right in this hour, right in our time. Depending on our resources, that might be different. If you're a doctor or a nurse or a delivery driver, your role is going to be very different to somebody sitting at home right now feeling quite helpless, feeling quite, what can I do? So try not to get consumed by the global worry and focus on, right, what can I do to support my community or to support my friends right now? This is a new normal for us all, and it won't feel normal at all. It will take time to adjust and get used to this difficulty. But within that, try and find some way of keeping a routine. Try and find some way of maintaining the contacts and the things that keep you going in life. So if you were meant to be going to Scouts on a Tuesday evening, what can I do on a Tuesday evening that reconnects me with my Scouting family, even though right now perhaps I can't go to actual Scouting in a Scout group. I also want to encourage you to take time out. There's an awful lot going on in terms of social media, and it may feel like there's a need to do everything that everyone else is doing, follow what everyone is doing. I need to do this challenge, I need to do that challenge, I need to share this, share that information. Slow down, take your time, take it in your stride and work through it at your own pace. It's also really easy to get overwhelmed by the amount of social media and the amount of news coverage on this topic. And working out what for you is helpful. It may be helpful to reduce some of the amount that you consume and take a step back from that as well. How do I make sure that I get the amount of news I need to keep myself and my family safe, but at the same time, I'm not reading it and checking for updates every 10 minutes and it's causing my anxiety to rise and rise and rise. Something as Scouts that I'd encourage us to also do is wherever possible is to enjoy nature, wherever possible, because it's not always easy in our circumstances, but to try and enjoy nature where we try and appreciate what we have around us in terms of the outdoors. And that might be looking out the window, that might be opening a door, that might be simply opening a window and smelling the fresh air. It might be going for a walk if we're able to do that in a socially isolated way. But do try and engage in nature. Even if it's looking back over old photos of an adventure or a camp you went on and reappreciating some of the things that we have and that we can be grateful for, or experiences we can be grateful for. And a point as well I want to make, and I won't cover this in depth because there's quite a few sessions on this in the mental health and wellbeing, the health and wellbeing oasis. But if we want to look after our mental health, we also need to look after our physical health. And that might look like sleep, hydration, nutrition, doing some level of activity. But at the same time, in this massive time of change, now is maybe not the time to set ourselves goals and huge unachievable aspirations. And our goal maybe should be to cope rather than to thrive and make a whole new goal that we haven't tried to achieve before. I know loneliness is a big problem at the moment that people are talking about, and it's also about and also around low mood and people feeling really quite down. And one of the things that we feel maybe there is a sense of loss, and a loss of connection with others maybe, or loss of activities that used to bring you pleasure, or activities that are really meaningful to you. So this little tool I want to introduce is a way of thinking about what activities can I do that bring meaning to me. So this is about reflecting on yourself and thinking about what activities in your everyday life before all this happened brought you meaning and pleasure and joy. And to think about it in these three areas can be quite helpful. So for example, achievement, so working towards things, working towards goals. There may be things that we're already working towards or we used to find really helpful, such as badges, awards, maybe some school or college work, maybe some courses, things that we find helpful and meaningful and bring us pleasure. In this kind of achievement area might be these kind of things, but this is an endless list you can come up with. But what can I do that gives me a sense of achievement and brings meaning to me at this time of difficulty? What's realistic and what's helpful? In terms of closeness as well, it's about thinking, how do I make sure I keep my connections with my social group going? Perhaps that's around FaceTiming friends, maybe that's doing shared activities together, and maybe that's about talking about how I'm feeling at the moment in these current difficulties. But the closeness is about how socially connected do I feel to others, and how can I make some of those connections keep going, or how can I make sure we're actually talking about what matters to us. And the last one on this page is enjoyment. And the enjoyment side of things is to think about what brings you meaning and pleasure in your life, and what can we do in this current climate. And that's all the fun things that we can think about. There's no limit to the amount of things we can do in this area. Playing games, eating good food, doing some self-care, looking after ourselves. Do ask any questions. If anybody has any questions on this, if I'm not making anything clear, please do ask. Somebody's asked there, is it okay if I don't go out into nature, but I look at the window? Absolutely. Some of us won't be able to or can't right now for any number of reasons, and that's absolutely fine. It may even be just looking at photos of a previous adventure or something we used to enjoy. So really good question there around trouble getting motivation. Absolutely. I think everyone is going to struggle for motivation at some point. And importantly, make sure that you're not giving yourself too much of a hard time to start with. We're all going to lose motivation at some point, and I think it's important to say that's okay and accept that this change is going to take time to adjust. But doing the things that are meaningful to us that I'm showing on this slide is one of the ways we can build up some motivation. Sometimes people tell us what we should be doing. Oh, so you should try this activity. You should try that activity. And what we really need to do is to think about what gives me energy. So for me, for example, at the moment, one of the things I miss is playing football with my work colleagues on a Tuesday night. And I can't play football right now. But one of the things I'm doing on a Tuesday is having a quick chat and a call with one of the people I play football with to reconnect with the things that I would be doing as a way of keeping that going. It's not perfect, but it's one way of finding something that's meaningful to me that I can do. A top tip here is to also look at the Great Dream model. And this is from an organization called Action for Happiness. And they have 10 key things to a happier living or a healthier living. And that can be really helpful for us to structure how we support ourselves and maybe encourage other people. And actually, those 10 things for me sum up why scouting is good for our mental health. It's not a scouting tool at all, but it's a really good way of thinking about actually why does what we do help young people or help adults. A couple of things I also want to say in terms of listening to others and actually yourself as well. As scouts, part of our role is to support other people and give our time to others. And part of this might be to listen. In order to listen effectively, we need to first listen to ourselves and look after our own mental health. Because if we don't look after our own mental health, we don't have capacity to hear other people and take on other people's what they're saying to us. Really importantly, you don't have to solve the problem or the difficulty they're facing. Sometimes we feel the need to fix things, and I think as scouts, we're very practical people, and we don't need to solve the difficulty that they're experiencing. We really don't. What we need to do is listen and hear that person and just accept what they have to say, accept what they have to say as their truth, even if we don't necessarily agree with them or agree with that perspective. We're going to try and understand that perspective and say, I'm really glad you've told me. That sounds really hard right now. Yes, I agree, things are difficult now. These are the sort of things we might say to them, even if we don't necessarily think, actually, that's exactly how I'm experiencing it either, because the likelihood is we won't experience it the same way. Also, as scouts, we tend to be very upbeat and positive people, and that's great. That's one of the best things about scouting, is the energy and the love and the passion that we have as a community. But actually, when someone's in a really difficult place in terms of feeling sad, anxious, feeling like everything's changed, turning things into a positive isn't very helpful. I know people have experienced this, I'm sure, where someone's just tried to flip everything around in a positive way, and actually we don't need that right now. We need somebody to sit with us and feel what we're feeling and just help us ride the wave of emotion that we're going through, because emotions are like a wave that we feel. So we need somebody to sit with us while that wave passes. I also like the little dog picture with the big ears. I think that's quite a good little reminder. So I've got a tool here to play, and a tool here to show you, and it's called the stress bucket tool. It comes from something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the idea is that we all have a bucket. We all have a capacity to deal with the things that life throws at us. And the idea is, as we grow older, as we build up new skills and we build our resilience, generally our bucket grows and our capacity to deal with things increases. So if you were a 6-year-old, we'd expect in 3 or 4 years' time, you would have more capacity, a bigger bucket to deal with life. Generally, that's how we'd expect. Everyone has a different size of bucket, and it's a very unique and individual thing, as an analogy. And the idea is that stress, life events, or changes go into this bucket. And if our bucket gets too full, it overflows. And at that point, that's when we feel really, really tired. We might feel very aggravated, very angry. We may also withdraw and become quite isolated and back away from the people that are trying to help us. And we know that when a bucket is quite full as well, it's when life starts to feel more unmanageable. The current pandemic is one thing that's going to be a huge, great big lump of something that goes in our bucket. And also it has big changes in terms of our relationships with other people. And it also has big changes in terms of our work, school life. So it affects absolutely everything that's going on in our bucket right now. Perhaps our bucket was already really full, and then this pandemic's come in and it's overflowed everything. And that's okay too. We do, though, have coping skills and activities that we can do that are like taps that release some of the stress and some of the difficulties that we have. And it's about trying to find some sort of flow to manage some of the things that are coming in by releasing out of these taps. Sometimes the things that come into our stress container or stress bucket could actually be quite helpful and positive changes, but still require our capacity to deal with them. So, for example, a promotion at work, a good exam result, a new relationship. These are all things that could be overflowing our bucket, even if they're positive changes. So that's also important to recognise. So as scouts, what a good thing, and as humans, a good thing to do is to draw our own stress bucket and reflect on what is in mine, what's going in, and how do I cope? How do I release some of this stress? How do I manage my own stress? I'm just going to have a quick check in with the Q&A. Right now, if we just make a note that people are asking about the research, I'll make sure I flag that up at the end. So another little tool I want to introduce is called the STOP method. Don't worry, I haven't misspelled stop, although my spelling is normally atrocious. But this stands for a little strategy that we can use. The idea is that if we're feeling overwhelmed, if we're feeling anxious or angry or sad, this is a way of slowing down our thinking and slowing down those feelings and trying to do something that's helpful. The first part of this is to stop. If you're caught up in your worries and getting more and more anxious, pause. So stop. Take a few breaths. Focus on your breathing out slowly, in and out. Steady, slow breathing. If we focus on our breathing just for a few moments, it can mean we can regulate better, and it can mean that we get back on track again with our thinking. Observe. What am I reacting to? What is going on around me? Am I safe right now? So what am I reacting to? What's consuming my worry? What's going on right now for me? Pull back. So another word for this might be perspective. But pull back. Is this worry important? Sometimes we worry about things and we get ourselves in a real twist and we end up worrying about worrying. So this is about pulling back and saying, is this important to me? Can I do something about this right now? What's another way of looking at this situation? And reminding ourselves that this will pass, because worries, anxiety, they may come back again and again, but the height of this worry right now, or the height of this anger right now, will pass, it will go. It may come back, but it will, this height right now will go. Lastly, practice what works. When I feel anxious, worried, sad, or overwhelmed, what normally helps me? What's the best thing that I can do right now to look after myself? So this little stop tool comes from a website called getselfhelp.co.uk. And it's not a particularly great website for navigating around, but if you search for this tool, it'll pop up. And there's also an app that can be quite useful as a way of going through the stages in a kind of step-by-step way. I also briefly just want to recognise as well, at this time of great change and challenge, there's going to be an awful lot of loss. And this might be loss in terms of our day-to-day lives and aspects of loss around our jobs, our work life, our school, our friend life, in terms of what we can be doing. Perhaps we're not going to a jamboree or a camp this year, so there's an awful lot of loss. But equally, people are also dying as well, and it's very likely that many of us will be bereaved or have already been bereaved at this time. And I just want to say, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Take your time, talk about your thoughts and feelings with someone you trust, and also seek help from local charities and organisations. And we're all in the same boat. We're all going through this together. So let's come together as scouts, as a worldwide family, to support each other at this massively difficult time. So I'm going to start bringing us up to a summary. If you've got any questions, now's a really good time. And I'll check in with Ray now as well to see if there's any questions we need to answer in the Q&A bit. But just a quick point really to say we all have mental health and some tools to look after it. And I say this because to get here today, to be a scout that's managed to scout for X amount of time and come to JOTI, you've already got a lot of resilience. And hopefully some of the things we've looked at have given you some ideas for what else you can do that might be helpful. We are also in very difficult, challenging times. As scouts, we need to look after our own mental health and support other people. And also a general broader point is to say that scouts can and do create a better world. And we need to in order to do that, we need to promote and talk about mental health awareness and also how we can support others in an empathetic way. So that's all the content I have for today. I just want to we've got about 5 minutes, a little bit more than 5 minutes left for any questions, any things that we need to talk about. Renat, how do we want to tackle this?
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in here real quick. Well, Jay, it's up to you. I've a bunch of questions lined up from people that have been very active. It's been great. So it's up to you in which order you want to answer them.
Oh, go for it. Whatever's helpful. Fire one at me. Okay, so I'm just looking at, I've just gone right to the bottom here. I don't know exactly. So I saw one there about long distance friendships and actually how do we support that? How do we support people in a long distance relationship? That's a really tricky one. But my chances are it might be worth thinking, what do I already do that's kept this relationship going? And if it's a long-term relationship that's been going on for a while, actually, this may have been before the pandemic that it's been a long-term relationship. What resilience and skills have we already got that we can draw on there would be my first question. What brought you together in the first place? If you're in a relationship with somebody, a fellow scout, a colleague, anybody, what brought you together as a friendship or a partnership to start with? What's important to you? Because that might give us some clues to actually what you can keep doing. Remember the achievement and the closeness and the enjoyment side of things on that slide. Think about what can we do that's meaningful to us to keep our relationship going. So yeah, are there any specific resources and tools specifically aimed at younger people? Yeah, there are actually. And there's quite a few resources that are helpful for people all over the world. The resources I'm most familiar with are from the UK, but there are some that I've seen from the World Health Organization as well. There's a few that are kind of top tips. If you're a parent or carer, what can you do? What can you do to support other people? There's also things that are like little booklets that you can get for young people to read as well. There's one called Dave the Dog, which is quite sweet. And it's about Dave the dog is worried about coronavirus, and there's loads of creative things out there. The best resource might actually be to Google. The Mental Health Foundation is a good place to start, and also another good place to go to is the World Health Organization website as well. The SDG, so Sustainable Development Goals, top tips for that. And really good question, actually. And it's perhaps something that we need to spend more time on. And I think we could have a whole session on this topic. My top tip would actually be to go to the Sustainable Development Goals website and look at what it says there around this goal. The specific goals around mental health are around promoting well-being, and also there's some goals around specifically preventing suicide. And I think scouts can have a role in both of those areas for sure. Using the Great Dream model that I mentioned as well is a good way of promoting community well-being and community mental health, and it's something that we can contribute towards. Fortunately, not going to have time to answer all these questions, but I'm just trying to pick out any questions that we haven't touched on anything similar yet. I've just seen one thing here around professional difficulties and work problems. And this may be exactly the same for people at school now, or college or university. And the biggest sort of driver for these difficulties from a mental health point of view is the uncertainty that comes with it. And one of the things we have is we often have a difficulty in tolerating uncertainty, and some of those tools like the STOP method may be useful for trying to build up some tolerance to that. It's the uncertainty that makes us anxious. It's the not knowing, and the thing is, we can't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the future looks like. So what we can't do is change the future. In a sense, we can't change what the worry is necessarily, but what we can do is we can try and tolerate the uncertainty while we're going through it. I can't give advice on a financial nature, and I think because we've got such a broad audience, it would be hard to do that. We do need to think about it in terms of, how do I tolerate that uncertainty? How do I cope with all this change and difficulty? I've seen something about, what's your job, what's your background? I didn't actually say that at the start, so apologies. I'm a mental health nurse, and I'm also training to be a cognitive behavioural therapist with young people at the moment.
Jay, we have 1 minute left.
Okay. Any burning questions that we need to? There's tons of questions that we have been able to get to, so I apologise for that. What I might do is take a quick copy and paste of these questions so that we can maybe answer them on social media afterwards. So to say, we'll have mental health. Let's make sure that we promote that message. Let's make sure we talk about it. And let's share with our fellow scouts the messages that we've talked about and discussed today. So thank you very much for your time today. I really hope you gained something from the session. Thank you very much for attending, and enjoy the rest of JOTI. I'm sure I'll see you on a different session at some point. Thank you.